Welcome viewers to MOOC's online course on Introduction to Indian Art and Appreciation, and this is the fourth module of the first section known as Introducing Indian Art, and this particular module is on the variations of Indian sculpture. And the art of sculpture is one of the most highly respected medium for artists, and it has been widely practiced not only in India, but throughout the subcontinent, in other parts of Asia, in Europe, in Southeast Asia, almost every part of the world. In Indian art, one of the most striking features about our sculpture is that you find them in different kinds of materials. You find them in stone, you find Indian sculptures in bronze, you find Indian sculptures in clay known as terracotta, and also different kinds of other less permanent and perishable materials. Particularly when you are looking at the folk art, you find artists are using more impermanent, more ephemeral materials. But the mainstream of Indian art is full of sculptures made in stone, metal, that is bronze, and of course terracotta. Yes, wood is another medium which is not so profusely used in India as much as it is used in, let us say, Japan, but still you do come across some sculptures in wood too. So, just to begin our discussion today, let us look at a couple of examples just to indicate the range of materials used to make Indian sculpture. This first image of an elephant is made out of a solid stone. So, you have a solid block of stone, and then you have a sculptor who is carving out a huge elephant out of that. And as you know, that carving is a negative technique, it is not an additive technique. The moment you scoop out, chisel out something out of a block of stone, you can't put it back. So, the carver has to be really very sure, very certain of the image that he is trying to arrive at. The next one is another example, a beautiful example of a sculpture made in bronze, which not only requires technical skill, but it also requires technological know-how. Whereas, for a stone carver, the relationship is between the stone and the carving. As far as a bronze sculpture is concerned, in between the sculptor and the bronze image is involved a huge technological process of bronze casting. And we shall soon see that right from the beginning of Indian civilization or Indian art history, that is once again Indus Valley civilization, we see that people are quite adept at and quite efficient in making sculptures in bronze, which implies that they knew how to cast images in metal, which is an incredible feat once again. And of course, terracotta. India is a land of clay, and hence artists have liberally used clay in order to make clay sculptures. But clay is something that is not only malleable, but very vulnerable. So, you need to put the clay sculptures in fire. So, you need kilns, you need furnaces, you need to make the clay sculptures turn into terracotta sculptures. And this art of terracotta seems to be quite a familiar and a well known art or a tradition practiced by Indian artists once again right from the beginning, that is Indus Valley civilization. Then our next interest would be to know about the locations of the Indian sculptures. Where do you find these Indian sculptures? Of course, you find independent sculptures like, for example, the image of a Buddha, or the image of a Nataraja, or the image of a Ganesha, or the image of a king made in stone, so on and so forth. but a huge amount of Indian sculptures are found on the or integrated with the architecture. So, in order to understand, in order to appreciate Indian sculpture, we always need to at least know and also feel how sculpture and architecture work together hand in hand. In a number of cases throughout India, we see that an architecture would have looked incomplete if there was no sculpture, and a sculpture would have had no place if there was no architecture. So, this very integrated relationship between architecture and sculpture is one very crucial aspect in order to appreciate and understand and even enjoy Indian art. So, this image, for example, conveys the message that right on the top of a structural temple architecture, there are innumerable sculptures. Sometimes these sculptures are carved right on the wall of the temple architectures, or sometimes they are built or made separately and later on they are placed and they are put together on the wall of the architecture. Whatever might be the process, this is true that there is hardly any one example of Indian architecture, I am talking about mostly the temple architectures, without any sculpture. It is almost impossible to find a single example of Indian architecture without sculpture. So, once again this integrated relationship, this inescapable relationship between sculpture and architecture is worth studying. So, apart from sculptures finding their places on temples, you also find lot of sculptures as a part of architectural elements. For example, pillar, or as a part of an architectural bracket, or maybe at the corner of an architecture high up, almost near the pinnacle. You find sculptures not only on the wall of the architectures or around a pillar, but also inside the architecture. For example, this one. This is an example of a sculpture, an image of a Buddha made in stone, which is part of the cave in which it is located. In fact, it not has been made or carved separately and put. This particular image of Buddha was carved out simultaneously when the entire architecture was being carved out. So, this is again gives us a clue that how the sculptor and the architect worked hand in hand, or a kind of with a mutual understanding between themselves, so that as the architectural process keeps happening, the sculptural process also keeps happening almost simultaneously. So, inside the cave architecture, the interior is again one place where you may find beautiful sculptures in Ajanta, in Ellora, in Badami, so on and so forth. And as I have already mentioned, this is again one more example of sculptures existing on or around pillars. Pillar is again a very important part, a very important member of architecture. So, why they are doing it is also a very important question, and why one would not leave a pillar blank, why it was essential for Indian architects and sculptors to adorn, yes, this is the word I am using, to adorn, to ornate, to decorate. Perhaps this was the most basic reason to have sculptures on the pillars, on the ceilings, on the bracket, on the walls of the temples, interior walls, exterior walls. Now, apart from adorning the walls, decorating the walls and the pillars with sculptures, there might have been some religious and auspicious reasons as well, which we shall discuss later on in some later modules. Often you find sculptures not like a freestanding, three-dimensional sculpture, but what we call relief sculptures on the walls of the caves. For example, this one, which is an image of a Varaha, one of the incarnations of Lord Vishnu, is found on the wall, which is slightly interior, not exactly the exterior wall of a cave at Udaygiri belonging to the Gupta period. You find a beautiful sculpture of a lion surmounting the Ashokan pillar of Mauryan period. So, in the history of ancient India, everywhere, any place that you are looking at, maybe a temple architecture or a cave architecture or a pillar, the exterior, the interior, anywhere you can expect to find either a relief sculpture or a three-dimensional sculpture or a freestanding sculpture, either in the figurative form or in a simple decorative form. Sculpture thus has become essential along with the development of Indian architecture. They could not conceive an architecture without sculpture. This is the fundamental truth about the relationship between architecture and sculpture in the history of traditional Indian art. Sculptures are even found, particularly religious icons, in the deep niches, in the deep recesses of what we call Garbhagriha in temples. This is one such example from the Durga temple located at Aihore in Karnataka. But it is not very unusual also to come across freestanding sculptures like this one from Chola period, the image of a Kaliyadaman, that is Krishna who is subjugating Kaliya, the snake, and originally this might have been kept inside the temple, but this was not essentially or physically the part of the architecture. Hence, we call this kind of sculptures we call freestanding sculptures. Like architecture, the legacy of Indian sculpture can also be traced back to Indus Valley civilization. And right now I have deliberately chosen 4 very different specimens of sculptures from Indus Valley civilization. Of course, there are many. You can find lot of these images available online in books, but I have deliberately selected 4 images, 4 distinctly different images in order to convey one important aspect about Indian sculpture, and this aspect is about the diversity of style. Now, diversity of style can be evident when one period or one dynastic period is replaced by the next one. Stylistic diversity can be found when cultural changeovers take place, either due to regional differences or due to chronological differences. But Indus Valley civilization in one example is one such example where during one time span, one singular time span, you find sculptures carrying different styles. Look at this priest head. It has certain stylistic features, which is of course not natural, in the sense it is not very naturalistic. It follows certain natural characters of a man, of a figure, of a human being, but the sculptor has taken certain liberty of doing things in his own way. Then compare this one with the next sculpture, which is a dancing girl made in bronze, again from Indus Valley civilization. It is so slender, slow elongated, that stylistically it becomes very different from the earlier one, followed by next one, which is surprisingly quite naturalistic and even realistic, in the sense this kind of realistic forms usually we expect to be made by the famous Greek and Roman sculptors, not Indus Valley civilization artists, but they have made it. And the fourth one is one terracotta figure, which is pretty conceptual and very imaginative, got hardly anything to do with the naturalistic form of a human being. So, in this next slide, I have brought all these images together in one frame, just to give us this idea of diversity. Particularly I am talking about stylistic diversity, which is abundant in the history of Indian sculpture. Then of course, talking about the themes, subject matters or content of Indian sculpture. Now, one very dominating and widely kind of evident subject matter of Indian sculpture is directly connected to religion. So, you have a huge number of Indian sculptures related to either Hinduism or Buddhism or Jainism, so on and so forth. As a result, you have what we called iconic images available in sculptural form. For example, this one, the image of a Ganesha made in stone, image of a Nataraj made in bronze, image of a Buddha, a reclining Buddha, which is terminologically known as Mahaparinirvana. This sculpture is found in one of the Ajanta caves, and obviously this is made in stone. Now, all these images that we are looking at right now belong to one religious faith or the other, Hinduism, Buddhism or Jainism. This one again is a very famous Varaha image, obviously belonging to Brahmanical or Hindu faith and belonging to Gupta period, 5th century AD, because from this time a lot of mythological figures are coming into existence in terms of sculptural form. Then apart from religious imageries, in Indian sculpture you may also expect to see non-religious, or let us say more directly, images related to or representations of the royal life, images of kings, to put it very simply. So, this is one of the earliest sculptures representing a king from Kushana period, and scholars have felt and they are convinced that this is an image of the famous king Kanishka of Kushana period. Though the head is not found, hence it is also in common parlance known as the headless sculpture of Kanishka. Now, this image of Kanishka does not have anything to do with any religion per se. It is a representation, a royal and definitely glorified and hugely authoritative representation of a king who was as powerful, as famous as any other king of the world. Similarly, you also have images like this, which is famously known as Didarganj Yakshi. Though the word Yakshi refers to some kind of mythological or religious connection, but in this case, though it is called Yakshi, because she has a whisk that she is holding in her right hand, and her dress and drapery and everything seems to be representing not any mythological or religious figure, but a courtly female figure belonging to the Mauryan period. This is one proposition. However, beside royal figures or figures representing characters from the royal culture, we also have a number of sculptural representations of common people and representations of daily life. One such example would be where you find innumerable examples of sculptural representations of daily life is Konark Sun Temple. Look at the lowest band. Look at the series of relief sculptures around the plinth of the Sun Temple at Konark. There is hardly any sculpture which is representing either the religious ideas or the royal figures. They are all about common people. So, let us look at a few images which are representative of either the common life, common people or the daily life of ancient India. Maybe they have a context, either a religious or royal context. The figures themselves are either musicians like this or this one, they are all from Konark. or a lady with a peculiar posture, probably there is a thorn stuck underneath her foot and she is trying to extract it with the help of a young man. So, these representations are abundant. There are plenty of such representations in Indian art, in Indian sculpture, and each having an individual and a very unique expression and movement and a gestural language as well. Then of course, there are plenty of images of loving couples in Indian sculpture. You can find them in Khajuraho, you can find them in Konark, you can find them in many such places where love between two human beings have been celebrated through very interesting sculptural representations. For example, this one. This reminds us of this idea of a peeping Tom, somebody peeping through the window. If you ask who is this guy, we do not have any answer. This kind of figures do not have any reference in any classical text or any mythological text. You can't really, in other words, identify these people. You can identify Lord Kanishka, you can identify Nataraja, you can identify various kinds of gods and goddesses from Hindu and Buddhist and Jain religion, but you cannot really identify these figures who represent the common life of India, the daily life of India, like this one, or for that matter this one. This beautiful figure standing on the balcony appears on one of the walls of the terracotta temples in Bengal, or for that matter this one. Now, how to explain these images in Indian art? No mythology can help you, no religious text can help you. These are virtually images of the contemporary life of India at that point of time when these sculptures were made. Now, this brings us to a very interesting understanding, and it is very crucial for us to appreciate Indian art wholeheartedly. That is, on the one hand, it is true, undoubtedly true, that Indian art by and large is religious, be it Buddhist, Hindu, Jain, no doubt about that. But on the other hand, within this religious context, within this religious framework, Indian art has been able to keep ample space for the non-religious, for the secular life, for the common life to enter and represent themselves, and this has happened repeatedly. So, we have often understood Indian art as a balanced view of life, not just simply focusing on religion, but also paying attention to the daily life, to the common people, to the normal life, who do not have any religious sanction, who do not have any royal stature, who do not have any grand status in the society, yet they find their representations within the range of Indian sculpture. And if you look at, whenever you are visiting any particular art historical site, whether it is Khajuraho, Konark, Mamallapuram, Kanchipuram, or any other sculptural temples, any part of India, look carefully. Do not just look at the most important and big images, they are beautiful no doubt, but also look at the lesser images, lesser in the sense of scale or size, and maybe lesser also in the sense of where they are located within the architecture. And it is in these places that you find that the daily life gets represented, the common people get represented, and this accommodation, Indian art being so accommodative, this makes Indian art very, very holistic. It is neither entirely religious nor entirely secular. It is a combination of both these aspects within one single unified worldview. apart from secular non-religious images or royal kingly images or obviously religious images, we also come across plenty of what we call fanciful, mythologically driven, imaginative imageries in Indian art. And this is one such image where you find yourself in an ambivalent situation, whether to call it a realistic image or a non-realistic image, whether to call it a religious image or a secular image. This is a fantasy image, because despite the presence, very strong presence of religion, secular life, royal life within Indian art, the presence of imagination, the presence of very imaginatively talented artists, be it a painter or an architect or a sculptor, is undeniable in Indian art. And that is the reason why Indian art, and in this case Indian sculpture, looks so fascinating, because you find every kind of manifestation of life there. Thank you.